about serving every child would stand in the way of children who would be better served by attending a school outside of their assigned public school. And if education is about serving the needs of every child, then giving parents, particularly those of lesser financial status, the means to provide their children with an environment in which they will be better educated not only makes sense, it is imperative. In closing, I would like to address those who have complaints with this bill. Let me be candid. I do too. But I've learned over my more than a quarter of a century in politics and government not to make the perfect the enemy of the good, or the ideal a stumbling block for the practical. That said, Senate Bill 193 moves education policy decidedly in the direction of providing needed opportunities for children in low and moderate income families. And failure to support this bill, make no mistake about this, would reward the bureaucrats and unions who have stopped at nothing to defeat it in the hopes of perpetuating the status quo and its companion fantasy that the only thing needed to improve public education is continued meteoric rises in spending that have fattened bureaucracies and union paychecks while enrollments have declined and our kids have demonstrably fallen behind. If the education of every child matters, then low and moderate income parents need the options Senate Bill 193 provides. If public education is to improve, then public school bureaucracies and unions will need to face competition for the privilege of educating our children. The same old isn't working. It's been failing our kids for far too long, and I believe that Senate Bill 193 will help change that by providing more of our state's parents with options their children deserve, no matter what their zip code. A perfect school system would realize that it can't serve the needs of every child and would provide those children it cannot serve with the ability to go where they can flourish. Senate Bill 193 is a big step in that direction, and I urge the House of Representatives to join the Senate in taking it. Thank you.
Next, we have several of our most important speakers, moms. The first is Maura Ryan.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know I'm not a public speaker and I don't even play one on TV. So please bear with me while I just try to hit a couple of talking points. And I did want to say one thing. For those of you representatives who haven't made up your mind about the bill or don't understand kids with disabilities, Rich Gerard did go to some IEP meetings to see what parents go through. And myself being a veteran and someone who is in the military, there are days where dealing with the public schools like going through a war a second time. So I'm going to talk about my son. Each child has unique needs, talents, and goals. By extension, a one-size-fits-all education will not succeed. Families across New Hampshire are sharing their stories with us about what educational opportunities mean to them. We are honored to share them as part of our Family Profile series. My local school district was unable to help my son. My son has autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and dysgraphia. There are a lot of kids who have learning differences. There is the IEP system, which is difficult for my son because he is in the 99th percentile for IQ. But socially, he's very awkward, sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. He has difficulty interacting with people, so even though he's very smart, he can't necessarily function in a social situation. My son originally attended our local public school, but wasn't really succeeding or thriving. The school urged me to give it time. First, they assured me that things would improve. Then they told me that my child was simply not that smart. But something seemed off about what they were saying, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. My child would talk about the collapse of the economy as easily as talking about Pokemon cards, and if anybody needs to know about mortgage credit default swaps, he knows everything. I had my kid tested and diagnosed, but the school argued with the doctors and refused to acknowledge some of his diagnoses, which they still do to this day. In the interim, my child was floundering. He wasn't outright failing, but he wasn't succeeding either. We hung in this limbo of needs improvement. Every parent-teacher conference centered on what is wrong with your kid. but not with solutions on how to make my child successful. And even after getting a diagnosis and recommendations from an experienced developmental pediatrician who teaches at Harvard Medical School, the school took 3 years to write an IEP with inadequate supports because they refused to acknowledge all of my son's challenges. My son has some amazing gifts. He has a love of science and math. As I said, he can explain stocks better than anyone I know. Both are areas where my son excels. And with a push for STEM-related jobs, I would feel like he would do well in the job market. The unfortunate thing is the school is not slating him to be someone who would get a job. And that is something that concerns me because someday I will not be here and I want him to be self-sufficient. My feeling is he has the potential to have a viable future. The problem is that once a child has an IEP, the level of education for that child, required for that child, falls to a very low standard. Rather than being required to meet the same standards as other students, the standard falls to a bare minimum level of progress. This meant that the teachers were no longer invested in having my child succeed because the standards were now lower. I tried everything I could do to improve this situation and future opportunities, but to no avail. In frustration, I withdrew my child from public school to put him in another school. And I just have to tell you, the military pays $1,683, so I am not wealthy by any means, but I do want to pursue other opportunities for my son. The public school is no longer the place for my child. It's a large school which added to his anxiety. Access to gifted classes was denied without consideration. In fact, there was a pervasive attitude that any level of challenge would be too difficult, too trying, and unfair to other students. This was despite the fact that my child had already completed geometry in 7th grade in a private math program. My child was instead tasked with learning to read a ruler, which was boring and inappropriate for a kid who regularly reads science textbooks for fun. After elementary school, all supports in a mainstream classroom became inaccessible. My kid was placed in a resource room with other kids with IEPs and a huge variation in learning abilities. It's critical that students with autism be around neurotypical peers to understand behavior, and that opportunity was not there. The public school wanted a schedule of a few classes, 4, which would limit the opportunity to get a high school diploma and destroy any chance of a college education and a career in science. In an effort to consolidate costs, the school created a separate and unequal education for children with disabilities. Putting my child in another school enabled mainstreaming and more classes, a chance at a future and a job. After all, kids don't remain kids forever. They do grow up. And as parents, we can't be there forever either. They need the tools to support themselves. Naysayers will argue that putting my child in another school means losing out on the IEP. However, when the IEP is not working, there is no reasonable recourse. And frankly, if it's not working, there's no reason to retain it in public school that is not invested and has no impetus to see my child succeed. Every school district has approximately 20% of their entire population of children with a disability. If we aren't giving them the tools to support themselves, we will have large portions of our newly minted labor force unable to equally participate in jobs. By opening up school choice, we're opening up educational opportunities that lead to jobs and independent living. The goal of IDEA is independent living, and I don't feel like it's being lived up to. We need as many people as possible in the workforce, both to provide our kids with the ability to be a part of the community, increasing their self-esteem and feelings of self-worth, as well as providing them with opportunities for social mobility and advanced education. I strongly encourage everyone who is looking at any legislation for kids with disabilities to talk to parents who have kids in the school with disabilities. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Katie McLaughlin. I live in Hampton Falls. I have 5 children, and I'm a homeschooling mom. I support this bill, and because I believe, after all the research I've done since its inception several years ago, this will benefit children, taxpayers, families, and the school system. The empirical research also shows that it improves racial integration and academic outcomes for everyone. Now, the 3 myths, we've heard those this morning, and I'd like to touch on them again, because these are the 3 that we hear repeatedly. They're related to funding, accountability, and the separation of church and state. I believe at the root of all these myths is a fear of change, a fear of the unknown, a fear of the what-ifs, and an incomplete understanding of what's out there. Let's talk about funding for a second. We had $17 bills, each representing $1,000. 12 of them represent the fixed cost of an education for a child in New Hampshire. It's the money that we need to keep the lights turned on, to pay the teacher salaries, pensions. It's money that we pay for debt service. 5 of those, $5,000, is the per student variable cost. This is money for textbooks and supplies and software licenses. Under this ESA program, it's around half of that $5,000 would follow the child. Now, that normally follows a child anyway when the child chooses a different district. So now it will go with the child who chooses to be under a parent-directed education plan or under a private school, but that leaves $1,000 to $2,000 or more remaining in the public school system, so that leaves more money per child. But the way this bill is written, I think there is no way this can do any harm financially to the public schools. Second myth, it's accountability. All right, this is a funny one because I think the schools and our state still cannot define what is good accountability for our schools. So until we can come to agreement on it, we're going to keep wrestling. Is it test scores? Is it graduation rates? Is it job placement? What is going to define what a successful school is? If it's test scores, are we really happy with the 50 and 40 percentiles that we see for proficiency on the proficiency tests in our public schools? What about college readiness? How many kids need remedial instruction when they get to college? Private schools do have accountability. They have rules that they have to follow, there's tracking methods, and they do testing. Parent-directed education also has accountability. Under this bill, they have to do yearly tests that are norm or criterion referenced. The next myth, separation of church and state. This has been tried in the courts countless times. It has been found that if a parent has funding and they have the choice, many choices of how to use that funding, if they do choose to use it for some religious instruction, then that is constitutional. It's also been found, as in the Missouri playground case this year, that if we say funds can go to anyone and anything except for religious schools, then that is a hindrance to the free exercise clause. So I think it's a myth that this is a violation of separation of church and state, and I believe that if it's brought up to a legal battle, that it is just an effort to stall the ESA program. Another myth, the myth is we already have school choice. Well, I think we all know that, yes, the well-off among us do have school choice. They have lots of options. But the squeezed middle class and the low income do not. I'm a home educator, and I often counsel and help parents who are struggling in the public school system. These are usually very astute, hardworking, involved parents, but for one reason or another, their child is not doing well. These parents have tried to make the schools better, usually to no avail. So what's at the root of spreading all these myths? I think it's fear of change. Well, the world is a changing place. It's constantly changing. We need a school system that will adapt to that. I think that the fear of competition is unfounded. Competition will cause us to change, and it will bring about improved public schools as well as improved outcomes for those who choose school choice programs. The other fear is rooted in things they don't understand. I think people know very little about private schools and how they're run, the same as charter schools. I think people also know very little about homeschooling. I'm given questions all the time. What they conveniently ignore is the studies that show homeschooling is one of the only school methods that has been proven to close the achievement gap. Also, what if? What if a parent makes the wrong choice? Well, parents will make some poor choices. So will teachers and administrators. What if the ESAs take off and the demand grows for them? What will that mean? What if there's a religious school and they teach kids that there could be some scientific evidence again for a young earth? Is this scary? No. It's giving parents a choice, and what the research shows is parents, even those who are poor and minorities, can make good decisions when they are given options. All these fears and lies have been causing a hugely detrimental effect on our society. They're preventing New Hampshire children from accessing educational materials, supplies, tutoring that's available now in the 21st century. I believe we can access curriculums, environments, class sizes, teachers that match our students. It's kind of like how as adults, we have the ability to choose our work environment. If we don't like our work, if we don't like a boss, we have the ability to go somewhere else and work. Those who receive food stamps can take those to any grocery store. Those who are in Medicare and Medicaid, they have choices on who their doctor is. So I think having a choice in education is a matter of human dignity. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know that this is also a matter of saving lives. It's those children who are out there suffering in the schools day to day, who cry on a daily basis, whose stomach hurts. If you have not talked to parents who have had those, then you just haven't talked enough, because those kids are out there and they're suffering, and we see suicide rates on the climb. So I think we need to have a school system that will allow for parents to have more choices. In the end, this helps everybody. Schools save money, kids are happy, taxpayers are happy, and we get more involved parents.
Our final speaker is another mom who's also a state representative, Lisa Freeman.
Thank you, Cline. For the record, it's not my birthday. So, I am the last speaker, but I have to say that I am so impressed with all of the previous speakers. I often hear sitting on the Manchester School Board sometimes that it's for the children, and I chagrin when I hear that comment. But truly, the people who are standing here today are for the children. And they're not only for the children, but they're for the families. And subsequently, when there's happy families, there's a happy community. And when there's a happy community, there's a well-functioning society. So we all know that every child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education. But what if that education is unattainable?